Hello, my fellow AI-empowered artists. Today I'm going to share with you guys a little deep dive experiment I did using a cool new program I signed up for. It's called ArtSpace.Ai. To begin, I like to copy prompts from another awesome site that's free right now, while they're training the model. It's called fluxpro.art. The community there just creates amazing images, and the prompts are very descriptive. This image on that site just caught my eye, so I wanted to see what ArtSpace.Ai could create if given the exact same prompt. In total, I created 10 versions of this image. For the 5 in the top row, I kept the mention of watercolor and colored pencils in the prompt, while changing the preset option from raw, no preset, to watercolor, then analog film, realism, and finally, fantasy. Then for the 5 versions in the bottom row, I removed the mention of watercolor and colored pencils from the prompt and ran the same 5 presets in the same order. So now let's take a closer look at the results of each test so we can weed out any nuances. Using the model Nova 2024 preview and the raw, no preset setting, this was with the mentions of watercolor and colored pencils in the prompt text. Looks all right. Again, using the model Nova 2024. Actually, this whole test was with the Nova 2024 model, so I'll just stop mentioning that for the rest. Using the watercolor preset, with the mentions of watercolor and colored pencils in the prompt text, you can tell this one has more of a painted appearance. It even has some drippings of watercolor in the background for effect. Pretty cool, I think. And now using the analog film preset. With the mentions of watercolor and colored pencils in the prompt text, it doesn't really look like an old photograph, but I think that's because of the 2 artistic words in the prompt bringing in an illustrated style to the image. This 4th sample is with the realism preset. It looks great, but still has a bit of an artwork feel to it, albeit more of an oil painting style than watercolor or colored pencils. Perhaps the model knows that oil paintings are a more suitable medium for attaining a realism appearance. I could be wrong, but a worthy hypothesis. This 5th and last example that included the mentions of watercolor and colored pencils in the prompt text was done using the fantasy style preset. I can definitely see the watercolor influence here. I'm not sure what fantasy is supposed to look like though. I guess we'll find out in the 10th image of this test where we did just fantasy without the mention of the medium used. So now this 6th image is where we start the tests without mentioning the watercolor and colored pencils in the prompt text so that the model can rely solely on its presets for the style used. So it still looks much like a painted illustration, but now I'm realizing that also in our prompt we had the words hyper-detailed illustration, which we did not remove for the last 5 tests. So the images will still have an illustrative feel to them. The 7th test with the watercolor style produced a nice image. You can definitely tell there's some layering of colors as watercolor paints would blend. The 8th test with the style analog film, of course, still looks illustrated, but with a hint more of realism. Our 9th test is using the realism style preset again. I think this is my favorite version yet. You can hardly tell it has an illustrated touch, if anything again, with oil paints that have the ability to make a very lifelike, accurate work of art. Our 10th test image here is using the fantasy preset setting again. I still don't know what exactly the fantasy style looks to accomplish. I like it either way. These remind me of a sci-fi comic book illustration style, if anything. And now a bonus round for you, if you stuck with me this long. I was wondering what these 5 styles would look like if I took out any reference to handmade art styles, so I finally took out the mention of hyper-detailed illustration and ran the 5 style presets again in the same order. They all look pretty great, but I think the realism setting probably looks closest to what the name of the preset touts it to be, followed by the watercolor preset. We still don't see what fantasy is supposed to do, but I have another experiment I did with a Dia de los Muertos test, in which it actually gave me what I agree looks like a cool fantasy style work. If you want to see that experiment, subscribe to this channel to get notified when I put that one out. Should be pretty soon, if not already out by the time you're seeing this. Thanks for joining me on this AI expedition. We're just at the start of the trail, my friends.